Every year, around 2 million Muslims stand shoulder to shoulder in Makkah. Once the pilgrims enter the sacred sanctuary, nationality fades into the background. No border checkpoints, no national divisions, just white cloth, bare feet, and one direction of prayer. But here's something worth thinking about. The moment those same pilgrims leave Makkah, the world changes. Passports are checked. Borders reappear. 57 countries, 57 flags, 57 governments. Strange, isn't it? If the Quran describes believers as one ummah, one community, then how did we end up with so many borders? Were these divisions always part of the Muslim world, or were they created much later? To answer that, we have to go back in time. Long before passports, long before national flags, and long before modern borders. Muslims did not see themselves primarily as citizens of separate nations. Instead, they belonged to something larger. A single ummah. The word ummah appears more than 60 times in the Quran. Its meaning changes depending on the context. Sometimes it refers to the followers of a prophet, sometimes to an entire community, and sometimes to humanity itself. But one idea remains constant: identity built on shared faith, not shared borders. Even the earliest Islamic political document, within the Constitution of Medina, described a one ummah that bound together Muslims and non-Muslims alike in a single political community based on mutual obligation. For centuries afterward, Islamic civilization did not organize itself primarily around ethnicity or territory. Empires rose, Umayyad, Abbasid, later Ottoman, ruling over Arabs, Persians, Turks, Berbers, and dozens of other peoples, often under a single sovereign who claimed the title of Caliph, successor to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It wasn't always a seamless brotherhood. Dynasties fought each other constantly, and historians still debate how unified this world really was in practice. But its official language of legitimacy was religious, not national. It's a question rarely asked out loud because it touches something deeply sacred. Islam speaks of a single global community of believers bound not by blood or geography, but by shared faith. And yet, Indonesia is not Egypt. Nigeria is not Kazakhstan. Each has its own government, its own army, its own economy, its own seat at the United Nations. So a deeper question emerges: are these borders ancient and inevitable, or are they something else entirely? Lines drawn more recently by decisions made across centuries, and sometimes by hands that were not always Muslim ones. To understand the answer, we have to leave the Middle East and travel to Europe during the age of the printing press. In 1983, Anderson traced this feeling to the rise of newspapers and printed books. For the first time, millions of people could read the same words at the same time and imagine themselves living the same story. Around the same period, scholars Ernest Gellner and Eric Hobsbawm arrived at similar conclusions from different directions. Nationalism was not simply the discovery of an ancient identity. It was a creation of the modern age, a new form of loyalty, designed for a new kind of world. But if this is true for France, Germany, or Japan, then another question appears. Is it also true for Iraq, Pakistan, Egypt? But the Muslim world did not enter the age of nationalism through the same path as Europe. For centuries, political identity was shaped by empires, dynasties, and religious institutions rather than the modern nation-state. Then came the event that transformed the entire map of the world, the First World War. When the war ended, old empires collapsed, and the Ottoman Empire, the last major institution claiming to represent a unified Muslim political order, began to disappear. In 1924, the Ottoman Caliphate was formally abolished. But the forces that shaped the future had already been set in motion years earlier. In 1916, while the Ottoman Empire was still fighting for survival, two colonial diplomats, one British, one French, secretly agreed to divide its Arab provinces into spheres of influence. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a name that would echo through generations. For many in the modern Middle East, it became a symbol of broken promises and foreign interference. Historians still debate how much responsibility that agreement truly deserves. The borders we know today were not created by one single map, but through years of negotiations, mandates, and political struggles. Yet its symbolism proved more powerful than its details. From that colonial mandate system and the independence movements that followed, came something genuinely new for much of the Muslim world: sovereign nation-states, each with its own flag, its own currency, and its own imagined community of citizens. But religious unity did not disappear. It adapted. In 1969, after an arson attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, Muslim-majority states created the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Today, it brings together 57 nations working across economics, culture, and diplomacy. Yet each member still protects its own national sovereignty. And now, a newer force is reshaping the question once again. Global charity networks, transnational Islamic scholarship, and above all, the Internet. A Muslim in Jakarta can now feel instantly connected to a Muslim in Marrakesh, watching the same Hajj broadcast, joining the same conversations, sharing the same moments, without a single border being crossed. So which is more real, the 57 flags or the single Ummah that Friday prayers and the pilgrimage to Makkah still bring to life? Perhaps that is the wrong question. Perhaps identity was never meant to be singular. A Muslim today can carry a passport and a prayer mat, stand for a national anthem, and answer the call to prayer, not as a contradiction, but as two parts of the same life: a citizen of a nation and a member of something far larger, a community that no border has ever fully contained. Every year, in Makkah, that larger reality becomes visible once again, if only for a few days. Then the pilgrimage ends, the passports return at the airport, the borders remain. But one question does not. If Muslims are one ummah, what exactly are the borders for?